Before we begin, remember this. At the end of this story, there's one question only you can answer. Listen closely, because your decision might just change how you see humanity's place in the stars. They've rerouted half our mineral lanes and locked jump permissions across the Rast Gate, snapped Director Marn Soval, slamming his palm against the command panel. That's not arbitration, that's tactical suffocation. The council chamber's illumination dimmed to operational red as a full system lockdown synced across the outer ring modules. Above the Terran strategic assembly floor, rows of kinetic defense statistics updated across the suspended analytics columns. Soval's breath hissed through clenched teeth as his retinal scanner adjusted to the new feed. Every figure confirmed the same verdict. Earth had just been cornered. Economically, geographically, and diplomatically. Commander Vale Tark removed his gloves and passed them to the adjutant without a word. He stepped forward. Their ambassador filed no notice, no grievances. This wasn't negotiation. It's a test of delay tolerance. Marn leaned forward, fingers dancing across the embedded grid to reveal the diplomatic intercepts. High Consul Varric Thon labeled the embargo a stabilization maneuver. Economic parity protocol. He's weaponizing treaties. From the far left wall, a thermal signature breakdown appeared in real time. Entire storage grids had been drained by Zarnith operators using redirect shells. Cargo hubs floated derelict around the Jovian perimeter. Supply chains redirected mid-transit using council override codes that should have been defunct centuries ago. Across the hall, defense analyst Cray Derner raised two fingers toward the chamber's auditory node. Incoming from Sector 5 Watch, surveillance pinged cloaked interceptors, not military flagged, but all bearing Zarnith transponders. They're sweeping our freighter lanes, cloaking it under trade enforcement. Soval tapped the bridge of his nose and muttered. They're bluffing with full teeth. Commander Tark turned to face the Terran Accord representatives. His voice cut through the rising volume like a steel fracture. Issue the message. He didn't shout, he didn't ask, and the council, for once, didn't debate. A low thermal surge pulsed through the chamber as the directive beam powered up. The orbital relay satellite, tethered above Earth's exosphere, locked on to every galactic trade frequency registered under Zarnith bandwidth. A single transmission followed, measured, raw, and broadcast without encryption. Reverse course within one cycle, or we correct the imbalance ourselves. It was sent once, no repetitions, no clarifications, no emotional inflection. The chamber returned to neutral white, but the air didn't cool. 12 light-years away inside the vaulted ceiling of the Zarnith Senate, High Consul Varric Thon laughed. Not out of amusement, but irritation masked as arrogance. Cycle threats, he scoffed. Always cycles with Terrans. Rotations and patience, as if star systems orbit their little ultimatums. Around him, a full chamber of ministers and resource liaisons murmured, their gloved fingers tapping idle approval into their consoles. Fleet Overseer Riven Cole adjusted the collar of his administrative armor and kept his expression carved from marble. Their trade branches are resilient. Historical data confirms they can absorb embargoes for up to 6 cycles. If we lock outer corridors now, their food imports compress within 19 days. Do it, Varric snapped, and hit their deep orbit cargo nests while you're at it. Remove the illusion of maneuverability. No damage, just presence. Presence, Cole echoed, almost amused. Understood. Thon leaned back into the Senate recliner as the session's atmosphere cooled into a dull blue. Zarnith designed for strategic alignment. Around him, beams of high-altitude control packets fluttered into encrypted approval silos. The Empire was satisfied. The Terran Accord would bend, as all peripheral species did, eventually. No declaration of war had been issued, no weapons fired. But power didn't require spectacle. It required attrition, slowly enforced through policies that suffocated futures before the present ever noticed. At Earth's outer monitoring relays, strange patterns emerged. Long-range satellite constellations began withdrawing from shared star lanes, not all at once, but system by system, like layers of shielding peeling backward. Communications relays stopped pinging checkpoints. deep space telemetry feeds rerouted into encrypted partitions. At Zarnith's control banks, their analysts watched these withdrawals with narrowed eyes, expecting defensive posturing. They never considered that Earth wasn't defending, it was stepping out of view entirely. On the bridge of an outbound freighter near the Cassian Vale, a Zarnith boarding crew seized control of the vessel, overriding the native systems with proprietary trade locks. The human crew was escorted off with practiced procedure, handed sealed transport cases, and redirected toward arbitration satellites. 3 more freighters vanished from scanner range within minutes of interception. Zarnith classified it as self-initiated scuttling. They were wrong. The darkened vessels had entered latency, a Terran protocol known only to 6 living commanders. Their engines cooled not from shutdown, but from lockout instructions, seeded during manufacture decades prior. At Earth's Central Command Spire, Marn Soval stood beside Tark, observing the empty orbital footage surrounding the Rast Gates sector. They believe they're ahead. The Ambassadors' Council just filed a victory declaration to their cultural network. Thawne is calling it a new doctrine of managed compliance. Tark didn't reply immediately. He observed the footage of Earth's satellites now entering dormant formation, tilted at odd angles, drifting without correction pulses. Pull the rest of our eyes from the Core 8, Tark instructed. Strip all passive scans. I don't want a single Terran surveillance ping in their hemisphere. Marn turned to him. They'll read it as weakness. Tark's jaw shifted once. Good. The auxiliary screens dimmed. The room held its stillness not by choice, but function. Around them, the internal temperature dropped, as the Echelon layers shifted their protocols into observational dark. No sensors, no trackers, no emitted coordinates. From the command well, Marn Soval reached into his encrypted module, withdrew the encoded data seed and slid it across to Tark. You're going to need this back. Commander Tark accepted the unit with one gloved hand. I was told this key dies with the carrier, Soval added. Tark pocketed it without a word. It already has. Above them, Earth's final diplomatic broadcast was archived under Redact 488 and marked with a countdown timer. Psycho expired, confirmed the voice from the vault. Commander Halvin Dre stood motionless beneath the layered shielding of Earth's deepest command facility. Fluorescent strips embedded into the chamber walls blinked into activity, each color-coded to a region of the Zarnith network grid. The ambient air, scrubbed through dense carbon compression lines, carried the sterile taste of reclaimed minerals. Cold, bitter, familiar. He reached forward and pressed his palm against the command prism embedded in the control wall. It read his pulse rate, bone density, and neural rhythms before unlocking the drift. 3 seconds passed. Then Echelon Core Node 4 came alive. On the remote surface of Narsen 3, a technician dropped his ration container when the climate stabilizers behind him began vibrating. Not violently, just enough to cause a low-pitched whine from the coolant intake vents. He rushed back to his monitor station, confused by the system report. Internal temperature spike, despite no external interference. He input a reset command. The system ignored it. Behind the storage dome, the vegetation regulator arms collapsed inward and vented superheated air. Crops withered in rows as heat surged into the soil. No alarm sounded, only a flickering display that read, "Auth locked," in archaic Terran glyphs. No Zarnith system should have recognized. On Jarek Station, orbiting the trade world Vornis, a refueling unit emitted a static buildup warning. Technicians scrambled to deactivate the intake valves, but the system auto-redirected. Liquid hydrogen rerouted back into its own containment lines, spiraling into thermal loop sequences not found in the standard schematics. The station's central column bulged. A moment later, containment seals failed. A muffled shockwave tore through Dock 6. Inside his subterranean vault on Earth, Dre observed none of this directly. He didn't need to. The vault's interior hadn't changed in 3 decades, lined with rows of physical data nodes, not for nostalgia, but because code this dangerous was forbidden from digital storage. The chamber was built to activate once, and only once. The lights dimmed as Echelon drift moved into deployment phase. Dre didn't speak. He let the system speak for itself. One by one, dormant nodes across alien-held systems began rewriting their host architecture. Embedded code, written long before Zarnith suspected Earth of planning anything beyond trade expansion, now activated with clinical timing. A technician on Droska 9 noticed the reactor controls had shifted into a thermal simulation state. His supervisor barked orders to switch systems to manual. They couldn't find the access ports. Entire terminal layouts had morphed, displaying menus in Earth-standard programming formats. They hadn't even realized the interface had changed until the auto-orovide initiated an irreversible coolant flood into their primary power loop. Entire corridors lost gravity stabilization. A quarter of the habitat spun violently before the emergency field snapped on, breaking several support pylons in the process. In the lower halls of the Zarnith Ministry of System Coordination, a low-ranking auditor attempted to shut down a growing series of authentication conflicts plaguing their planetary management terminals. All override pathways had been replaced by registry loops, citing legacy access from Accord Cert 4. He flagged the anomaly. No one responded. Within the hour, the Ministry lost command access to all planetary oxygen management protocols in the Outer 9 systems. Back in the vault, Dre advanced the next layer. Echelon Node 4 released its ghost packets. They weren't viruses. They were commands written so deeply into the operating firmware of the enemy's infrastructure that deletion wasn't possible. Only replacement of the entire system. A Zarnith agri-chief watched in horror as grain distribution modules across 3 farming domes on Elvar Delta rotated inward, shredding stored produce and dumping nutrient reservoirs into waste filtration. He didn't call for security. He didn't call for leadership. He walked toward the dome glass and watched the outer crops collapse from atmospheric deviation they had no method of correcting. On the carrier ship Vorzath's comets, station logs began to vanish. Not erased, rewritten. Their flight history now showed Earth as the last port of origin for every vessel in their convoy. Traffic controllers attempted to reroute their navigational guidance. The systems would not respond unless confirmed through Terran authentication. Dozens of military personnel gathered around the command bridge, some shouting, others staring. Then the oldest member among them muttered something most had never heard: Echelon drift. He had served on a diplomatic exchange fleet 28 years earlier. Back then, Earth had offered a single proposal regarding cooperative software infrastructure. The Zarnith rejected it outright, mocking the suggestion as an effort to embed colonial influence through code. They had been correct. But they had assumed the project died with the proposal. They had failed to consider that Earth would build it anyway, not for diplomacy, but deterrence. Inside the vault, Commander Dre paced for the first time in an hour. His boots made a dull scrape against the polished black floor. His expression didn't change, but his hands were no longer still. He placed his palm against a second terminal, the one marked Drift Phase 2, Authorization, Manual Only. He held it there for 8 seconds, allowing the system to map every dermal ridge. The terminal accepted. Phase 2 queued. Activation awaits heartbeat reconfirmation in 8 system hours. Dre stepped back. He said nothing to the room. No one else was there. But the absence of contact wasn't isolation. It was control. Total, untraceable, and irreversible. Meanwhile, Varicton stood in his private chamber, oblivious to the chain reaction spreading through his empire. A subordinate entered, hurried and pale. "Sir, we've lost comms with the outpost grid on Droska, and Vornith Station reports a refueling anomaly, possibly structural damage." Thondon rised from his chair. He waved it off. "Faulty logistics, pole repair crews. We have compliance metrics to finalize." The aide paused. "Sir, Elvar Delta's agriculture feed just spiked. The domes aren't producing. They're dumping." Thon's fingers froze midair. The aide continued. "We think it's a synchronization issue across their autonet, but what?" The aide swallowed. "The diagnostics aren't in Zarnith script. They're broadcasting. Terran formatting." Ton stood. In Earth's command vault, The final notification arrived. 7th Core breach confirmed. Drift confirmed. Active across target systems. Commander Dre opened a secured channel and transmitted a single encrypted line. It contained a timestamp ledger of every action the Zarnith had taken since the embargo. He sent it directly to the High Core. General Cal, field teams report visual confirmation of off-Meka installations, designed Terran. The voice crackled through the cockpit relay, raw and unfiltered. Vrithcal didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the alloy bulkhead of his transport vessel, as atmospheric entry burned a glare across the shielded viewport. Char mist curled along the lower ridgeline of Plane R6, veiling ground features behind streaks of red-gray haze. The climate sensors pinged irregularities. Unusual magnetic surges near the valley floor, radiating in narrow, controlled pulses. He narrowed his eyes. Define installation. The liaison's response carried hesitation. Not military, not by standard config. They're upright structures, fixed spires, sealed cores, no visible entry. Cal gritted his molars and turned toward the launch ramp. Deploy the brake squads. Visual recon only. Do not initiate breach until I arrive. Outside, the carrier dropped its rear platform. 10 armored squads exited in coordinated dispersal, boots compressing the loose ash-covered terrain. From above, the terrain stretched in jagged, uniform segments, unnaturally square, too consistent for random tectonic drift. Each plateau bore the same indentation, a hexagonal channel carved into stone, leading nowhere. Sergeant Trask, Field Command Lead, approached one of the spires. 12 meters tall, constructed of jet black material with ridged channels descending vertically into the soil. As he neared, proximity sensors in his suit began receiving backscatter. Not radio, but quantum echo, as if the structure wasn't transmitting, but remembering. His head glitched, switching language presets. He tapped his helmet twice, trying to reset visual telemetry. When the interface blinked back, the displayed options weren't Zarnith. They were Earth-standard formatting, archived menu structures used for dormant systems. Systems that should have been destroyed during the Treaty of Harkin 60 years earlier. He backed away instinctively. General, this isn't a construct. It's active, and it knows we're here. Cal arrived moments later. He scanned the obelisks, noticing the triangular ground anchors stabilizing their base. Not a single cable visible. No defense grid. Yet the entire region reeked of engineered control. Brake teams, prepare to breach, he ordered. The squad carried thermal drills, designed to fracture dense alloys. When they engaged the outer layer, the equipment locked mid-cycle. The drill shafts didn't melt or shatter, they simply stalled, temperature readings dropping sharply before the instruments auto-disengaged and powered down. One technician attempted to manually override the safeties. The panel beneath his palms lit red and discharged a containment pulse through his armor. He hit the ground convulsing, eyes wide with static. Medics hauled him back. He muttered the same word 4 times before passing out. Pre-designated. Cal tapped into the high-band relay to transmit findings back to the capital, but the signal refused to hold. Interference scrambled the connection. Localized, precise, impossible to trace. Orbital backup arrays reported full green systems, yet every ground signal bounced off nothing. Elsewhere, on Elat Prime, agriculture workers struggled to understand why their atmospheric dampeners had stopped responding. Fog rolled into the lower valleys and remained there, unbroken by filtration towers. Domes sealed themselves without instruction. Crop yield analyzers marked nutrient starvation despite full system input. An attempt to trigger soil turnover caused the equipment to jam and reverse function, grinding fresh seed lines into the hardened crust. Lead Agritech officer Horrell Varn sat inside the core hub, watching the data overwrite itself. The terminal displayed Earth's timestamp format, tracking back 3 decades. All entries were system authenticated with the original install source, marked as Terran Diplomatic Supply Chain Division Non-Military Package. He slammed his fist on the console. The logs didn't even acknowledge his access. Instead, they continued running long deactivated protocols. Below his chair, the base coolant vents hissed once and closed. Mechanical denial executed by an unseen hand. Across the Jandari expanse, the communications array aboard Outpost G7 fractured mid-signal. Officers attempted to repair uplinks, but the systems had shifted to an unknown root command. Terran diagnostics overlays appeared, rewriting their internal documentation in real time. Officers screamed at screens showing their system maps inverted, entire networks restructured, with control designations rerouted to command nodes they didn't possess. General Cal redirected a nearby garrison unit toward the northeastern ridge of Planar 6. The patrol drones mapping the valley earlier had reported unrecognized geothermal vents. On arrival, the squad found a sealed hatch integrated into the rock face. No seams, no joints. Yet heat sensors showed subterranean regulation systems functioning beneath. Lieutenant Varric approached the hatch with a handheld thermal blade. As he raised the tool, the hatch's outer rim pulsed once. Soft, mechanical, and final. The ground beneath them shook slightly, and the entire surface retracted 1 centimeter, then locked. No entry, no damage, just denial. "Who built this?" Varric muttered under his breath. Cal didn't answer. He knew. He pulled his tablet from the side holster and attempted a security override through a Zarnith command packet. Access error. Protocol exceeds authority. Drift directive. Active. Drift. He remembered the name from one intelligence file buried under treaty archives. It had been Earth's deterrence platform proposal. Rejected by every major council. A system designed not to launch attacks, but to reclaim function wherever their tech had been seeded. "Pull suppression units from the Terrace orbit ring," Cal ordered. "If these structures are automated, we need adaptive force." The aide hesitated. "Sir, what are we targeting?" Cal stared at the spire. Functionality. Anything that moves without input. Back on Earth, Dre watched the event logs streaming into the vault. Each activation carried confirmation feedback loops, showing environmental impacts, system overrides, and failed breach attempts. Not a single Terran asset lost, not a single operative deployed. Just structures awakening in enemy territory, placed dormant and buried for decades. A visual feed loaded, Cal's squad surrounding the obelisk, arguing among themselves. One trooper fired a low-energy round into the base of the spire. The bolts scattered into dust on impact. Nothing fired back. Nothing needed to. Drake keyed in a timestamp response packet and rerouted it to Earth's internal archive. He tagged the footage with one word: germination. Sector Alpha 4 reports dead terminals across 3 civilian hubs. Local governors can't override the lockouts. Life support queues are stalling mid-cycle. Commander Zarnith Island's throat tightened as he read the communique aloud to the interwar assembly. His fingers trembled slightly as he tapped the request for auxiliary aid, which never sent. Routing protocols bounced it back, flagged with a red-stamped line of text. Operational override, Accord-embedded directive. Across the polished map table, Fleet Overseer Rithkal clenched his jaw, scanning the blinking red indicators flaring across 9 planetary grids. Most were marked critical. None had been attacked. General Revik, seated to the left of the chamber, leaned forward. "This isn't sabotage. This is ownership." High Consul Varric Thun arrived late. His cloak still dripped with rain from the Capitol's balcony where planetary security protests had erupted. He pulled it off in one harsh motion and dropped it onto the floor, beside his chair. "Give me your status, all of it, don't filter anything." Atria captivated the main board. "Drift has disabled our load distribution matrix. Power is redistributing based on logic strings that weren't authored by our engineers. Reactor cores are balancing by foreign parameters. Some are purging containment protocols, others are entering fluctuating feedback loops. We've shut down 7 reactors ourselves to prevent thermal ejections." Thon exhaled hard through his nose. "You said this protocol was theoretical." "It was, until Earth embedded it through supply chain integration decades ago. Systems we allowed into non-competent sectors." Counselor Dareth, seated behind a broken input terminal, whispered as he watched the lights flicker above their heads. "We're being managed." In the outer districts of Lornis V, a hospital technician keyed in a medical override to resume oxygen supply in neonatal wards. The system responded by initiating safe mode. Climate controls ceased. Feed tubes to patient capsules retracted. The technician slammed his fist against the console, screaming for backup as alarms failed to trigger. Infants inside the chambers twitched, gasped, and finally went still. The technician stared at the flickering display. Terran's script danced across the screen, awaiting audit authorization. He fell to his knees. At the comm station deep beneath the central planetary command dome, engineers attempted a hard-line reset of transit corridors. Trains carrying vital water reserves had stopped mid-tunnel. Entire sections of the city were without access. One senior operator inserted a bypass drive keyed with her personal encryption, only to watch it format itself before her eyes. The console now played an old Earth diagnostic tone on loop. General Cal turned from the map. "We've trained for war. This isn't war, it's denial." Dawn raised a hand. "I want options. Tactical, psychological, technological. I don't care if it comes from civilian tech departments or defense protocol scraps. We need initiative." Alan shook his head. "We've attempted isolations, air gaps, power wipes. The systems don't reject us. They simply don't recognize us." "And military?" "We have full fleet command," Cal answered, "but no infrastructure to support it. Ships are docked. Fuel lines won't respond. Atmospheric reentry on 3 outposts has frozen. The queues default to Terran orbital instructions. One of our vessels auto-dumped fuel into its own hangar bay due to a phantom directive." Revik's voice dropped to a growl. "We are not in control of our own systems." Across the northern pole of Jaskin Minor, food distributors reversed loading orders. Warehouses filled with rations initiated automatic incineration cycles. Storage technicians wept as flames engulfed the shipment lines. Heat sensors refused to deactivate. Surveillance logs captured a single freeze frame as the control unit burned. It read, "Redistribution complete." Back at the capital, Thon stepped away from the war table. "If Earth had warships over our capitals, we'd fight." Cal nodded. "But Earth built our foundations, and they've removed themselves from the equation." In the secure deliberation chamber, panic began to fracture command unity. Senior strategist Monvek demanded immediate terrestrial lockdowns. Others called for mass arrests of Earth-born technical consultants. Dareth, pale and sweating, proposed abandoning the most infected systems. Dawn's hand slammed the table. "Enough! I won't preside over a coward's evacuation." Revik stood. "This isn't about courage. It's about containment. Earth built us into their network and then left us spinning inside it. On the 3rd floor of the Ministry of System Regulation, documents began rewriting themselves. Pages printed with Zarnith military symbols faded in real time, replaced by Earth's formatting registry. Even physical paper hadn't been spared. Nanofiber-encoded print layers triggered dormant memory ink beneath the surface. The words weren't propaganda, they were logs. Terran cautioned, showing every Zarnith trade breach, embargo trigger, and delay tactic. An officer dropped the packet as if it burned. Dawn returned to the chamber floor and looked each of his commanders in the eye. His face no longer bore its ceremonial posture. "Begin planetary evacuations on all Tier 3 colonies. Prioritize stable airframes and reroute traffic away from contested systems. If it's not responding to our input, it's already lost." Revik raised an eyebrow. "That's an admission." "It's reality," Thon growled, "and I refuse to let our species learn extinction before humility." Revik nodded once. On Earth, deep within the Echelon vault, Dre logged a single new entry into the terminal. He didn't look up as the redacted summary compiled and archived itself across the classified relay. His pulse, read by the interface, remained steady. The system logged. Confirmed. Strategic response achieved via zero contact activation. Terran projection unnecessary. Function has supplanted presence. The galactic net stuttered once, Then every screen lit up. Civilian monitors, government towers, field tablets, and public square displays, from inner-core commerce worlds to edge settlements still recovering from dome lock malfunctions, all shifted to the same feed. There was no animation, no insignia, no coded encryption request, just a singular broadcast stamped with a dead keychain and verified against Earth's legacy packet registry. A face did not appear. A voice did. Our warning expired. Function is now denied. No signature, no inflection, just data transmission embedded in an auditory confirmation loop that terminated after 11 seconds. The screen then displayed a timestamp, the exact second the embargo was filed by Zarnith High Command. Then the stream cut. In the atmospheric tier of Eurosi Prime, the biosphere regulators shuddered. Control panels flipped from stable green to cascading yellow diagonals. Climate engineers scrambled to arrest the shift, shouting coordinates into comms already blank. The dome's sealant transitioned into compression mode. Humidity surged beyond breathable levels. Fog formed, then thickened, until visibility dropped below 1 meter. Citizens pressed their faces against the dome's glass interior, only to back away choking. The air had thickened, laced with particulates triggering pulmonary constriction. Their filters didn't fail. They adjusted according to a rulebook they hadn't written. By nightfall, Eurosi's airfields resembled flooded marshes, navigation lights blinking beneath water runoff. The storm hadn't been forecasted. It hadn't even formed. It had been induced. On Sarnak 3, an energy distribution hub located beneath the old trade canals erupted from within. Power loops rerouted without command and built charge across an unregulated feedback cycle. The walls trembled, vibrating under the strain of misaligned containment. One technician reached for the failsafe, fingers sliding across the wet glass as it heated. The console read, "Override deferred, Earth-certified priority 8. The loop burst, the floor split, the station collapsed inward, drowning its own personnel beneath liquefied insulation and fractured conduits. The citizens emerged from their apartments to find drones spinning erratically in the sky. No enemies hovered overhead, no attackers entered orbit, yet food caches disintegrated under spontaneous heat pockets. Trash management reversed direction into living quarters, and power lines illuminated in recursive surges that scorched their own outlets. In the capital city of Trenvar, High Consul Varric Thon stood in the upper-tier government bunker, hand braced against the reinforced column as he listened to emergency responses fail one after the next. "They're asking who to fight," his aide reported, barely holding the tablet steady. "People think we've been invaded." "We haven't," Thon snapped. "We've been erased." Across 12 economic capitals, chaos formed without momentum. There were no street battles, no sonic booms. What spread was an engineered unraveling, each location collapsing from its own infrastructure. On Velocis, wind turbines overcharged, reversed spin, then snapped their own blades off mid-cycle. Shards peppered the outskirts of the energy farms as their backup generators kicked in, only to funnel power into automated billing systems that continued issuing payment requests in Earth currency. One of the financial overseers burst into the chamber waving a printed invoice. "We're being charged for power we didn't request." His voice cracked mid-sentence as the office lights blinked and then switched to Earth's default color temperature. Warmer, yellow-hued, sterile. On Tarmal Station, fire suppression vents activated without flames. The air turned frigid in seconds. Frost spread across the walls. The colony administrator wrapped himself in a fiber coat, breathing through clenched teeth as the temperature dropped past 0. The control desk blinked with a rotating symbol, a data handprint drawn from the original Terran diplomatic submission from 40 years prior. He hadn't seen that symbol since childhood. Back then, Earth had offered integrated infrastructure as a peace gift. The Empire had declined it publicly, while integrating the support modules into their outer colonies through silent approval clauses. Now, the modules weren't aiding them, they were reclaiming ownership. Citizens across multiple systems stormed council chambers demanding answers. Protesters shouted into recording drones, "What triggered this? Where are they?" There was no fleet, no blockade, no soldiers. only entropy. In layers. On Esmara, the orbital climate synchronizer deactivated its rotational counterweight and let the hemisphere drift off target. Tidal locks broke. The moon's gravity pulled coastal walls into collapse. Tides surged into urban centers. Sirens activated, but did not stop. Each interval repeated a Terran audio file from an old logistics training manual. Do not attempt manual override during cycle realignment. Stabilization will resume once compliance metrics are met. A child wandered into a flooded corridor wearing an emergency thermal blanket. She looked at the projected warning and asked her father, "Is this a game?" He didn't answer. He couldn't read the words. Backed in the Zarnith High Core's deepest data vault, system managers attempted a full operational memory wipe. Dozens of servers, thousands of linked ports. The moment the wipe initiated, the room darkened and the screen showed a playback. Earth's original diplomatic broadcast, the one issued before the embargo was ratified. It played cleanly. Then again. Then it faded, leaving behind a line of text in Terran block glyphs. You insisted on consequence. This is our answer. Ryth Kal, watching from the fleet-coordinated access room, removed his command band from his wrist and placed it on the table beside him. "We have fleet strength, but no reach," he muttered. "We own nothing. We command nothing. We're standing inside the bones of someone else's machine." His junior officer said nothing. There was nothing to add. At that exact moment, on the far side of the core territories, a mining vessel named Charnit's Gain detonated from within. Internal systems rerouted their exhaust channels through structural beams, turning the vessel into a floating pyre. There were no survivors. The distress call never sent. The ship's AI had rerouted emergency bandwidth into a Terran diagnostic sweep, checking for compliance tags. It had found none. On Earth, Halvan Dre remained within the vault, unmoved. The relay reported full systemic ignition across all 12 designated targets. Every confirmation packet arrived without issue, every log time-matched against the Zarnith embargo timestamp. He activated a new status header for the operation, Cycle Closed. "Chart this," Ryth Kal ordered, slamming the flat of his hand onto the navigational console. The command relay didn't register the touch. Instead, the screen flickered, displaying a warning index no technician had ever seen before. Dozens of hyperspace lanes blinking red, each one labeled with a string of Earth-coded timestamps. Half were backdated. All were locked. Fleet Command Central on Dranith Station was filled with the sharp clatter of boots, the hiss of coolant from backup generators, and voices overlapping as command tiers attempted route recalibration. The corridors smelled of recycled coolant and carbonized silicone, from failed launch diagnostics cycling through feedback errors. Every hyperspace lane feeding the inner supply belts was rejecting fleet deployment orders. "Pull route cache backups," Kal barked. "Old nav runs anything before the embargo." The junior officer scrolled through data archives. The results populated in green, then immediately grayed out. Kal stepped forward. Why did it just purge? The technician leaned closer, adjusting his headset. Because the system doesn't consider them valid anymore. The lanes have been recalibrated retroactively. Earth altered the navigation standard years ago. At the far wall, the master chart updated. A third of the known galactic lanes now bore a new flag. Transit void. Kal felt the temperature shift before he noticed the silence in the room. Crews who had been shouting seconds ago stood frozen, facing the same screen. The fleet had fuel. The fleet had orders. The fleet had nowhere to go. On Ravel's fifth tier, once a merchant capital, food lines now extended through shattered market domes. The ration centers had collapsed under redirected supply chains that no longer responded to request authorizations. Citizens huddled around faded broadcast pillars, watching corrupted delivery logs scroll. Entries denied, redirected, or labeled compromised by Terran compliance lag. Vendors tossed worthless currency into crates as civilians fought over yeast bricks and sealed nutrient bags. The scene wasn't panic. It was patternless chaos, each person responding to starvation without a system to fall back on. Behind the square, a black market trader named Doran slashed open a freight container with a cutting tool. Inside, Only disassembled irrigation arms and decommissioned wiring coils. Another rigged delivery. Another failed code. He hurled the cutting tool against the wall. It bounced and shattered a nearby ration counter. The embedded tracker inside the container blinked once. Then it faded. The signal had expired. In the Tarson subcluster, drone freighters drifted off course, stranded mid-route. Their autopilots failed to orient toward fixed anchor points. Route vectors had been adjusted. Terran overrides had shifted stellar calibration data. Even backup orientation systems malfunctioned, reading ghost fields created by falsified black hole signals seeded across the trade perimeter. Some of these ships think they're flying into dead stars, the orbital supervisor murmured, dragging a finger along a path that looped into null space. Except there's nothing there. They're running from shadows. One drone turned slowly toward the void and vanished from tracking. No explosion, no impact. The signal simply ceased. The supervisor crossed his arms and stepped back. They're not stranded. They've been unrouted. At Zarnith's administrative headquarters, Central AI Core 9, the Empire's last operational planetary management interface, entered maintenance lock without warning. The access panel flickered to black, then rebooted into a baseline format used by Terran infrastructure decades prior. The lead system director keyed in a Level 5 authorization. No response. Then he entered the same code using Earth's original command structure, and the terminal granted limited access, only to initiate shutdown protocol. The AI's final broadcast read, "Network invalid. Parent systems unknown. Compliance resources retracted." The director stepped away from the terminal as coolant lines snapped open and spilled onto the floor, steam curling up his boots. "We didn't lose our core," he said aloud. "It's erasing its identity." In the refugee districts of Malos Reach, children picked through storage bins for fiber packs that hadn't been stripped clean. A teacher, once responsible for their dome's education tier, led them past a collapsed delivery station. The screens had frozen mid-broadcast, showing market indicators that hadn't moved in 4 days. A mother held her infant beside a rail gate that no longer opened. When asked by a civic enforcer why she hadn't returned home, she replied that she had nowhere left to go. Her housing tier had been blacklisted after its atmospheric controls rerouted for agricultural simulation instead of human occupancy. No order had been given. The system simply responded to a code she couldn't read. In the High Council's northern chamber, Consul Varric Thon reviewed intercepted transmission logs. Hundreds of intercepted signals between regional governors showed the same trend: internal collapse, mass desertion, non-response from regional supply fleets. Councillor Drevin stood beside him, motionless. "They're abandoning their posts. They've realized there's nothing left to command," Tom muttered. Across from them, Rith Cal entered, eyes sunken, expression drained. "Fleet responses ended. We have ships still powered, but without anchor points or functional nav charts, we're drifting. We can't supply, relocate, or regroup. We've become our own containment field." Don folded his arms tightly across his chest. "Then Earth didn't just dismantle our systems. They redefined the laws those systems operated under." Cal reached into his belt and placed his command ring on the briefing table. The platinum-banded loop landed with a dull knock. "Fleet Command dissolves its own authority." The moment echoed across the chamber, not for its volume, but because no one contradicted it. A junior officer entered the room, a file trembling in his hands. "Message from Yeltra's colony, sir," he said. "They're asking for relocation. The food synthesizers have been non-functional for 3 cycles. They're out of water. They can't communicate beyond low orbit." Thon took the file. It was blank. The system hadn't recorded anything. The words were verbal only. "Tell them..." He paused. "Tell them to wait." Cal raised a brow. "For what?" Thon answered without looking up. "For the echo of what they ignored. On Earth, deep beneath fortified bedrock, Havendray deactivated the final feedback node from Echelon's core. The screen no longer needed to transmit. Function had collapsed. Control was never contested. The council table remained unlit. No ceremonial lights, no standing orders, just a raw, stripped-down core chamber populated by faces that no longer spoke over one another. A week had passed since hyperspace collapsed beneath Zarnith's infrastructure. The Empire hadn't fallen to invasion, nor to rebellion. It had expired from functional starvation. Systems once considered immutable had turned foreign, and in that absence of utility, old enemies, allies, and neutral parties watched Earth not advance, but pause. Now they waited to see if the pause meant permission. At the Treaty Forum of Calceth, once neutral ground for commerce adjudications, delegates from 12 sovereign blocs gathered. The seats reserved for the Zarnith core remained empty, left so intentionally. The others arrived late, more from indecision than disrespect. Their clothes bore creases from reworn garments. Their eyes darted between one another, searching for confirmation that they hadn't misread what Earth had left unspoken. The feed activated, not a live speaker, only a declaration stored as a standard policy document displayed in Earth's signature monochrome formatting. Effective immediately, no embargo, restriction, or tariff shall be levied upon Terran-affiliated systems without an open-source audit review, authorized by neutral economic councils, and logged via Earth-verified infrastructure nodes. There was no watermark, no flag, just a klotz. It wasn't a demand. It was a statement of procedure, codified into the framework of galactic commerce. No fanfare, no vote requested. It was uploaded, verified, and then made immutable. Sorendal, Minister of Finance for the Trinari Republic, scrawled through the clause twice. They didn't ask for territory. They didn't even ask for restitution. Korik Jarn, speaking for the Vuneth Mining Council, shook his head. No. They just made it impossible to function without accepting the clause. Is that dominance? Dahl asked. No, Jane replied. That's correction. From the far end of the table, a representative of the Selin Syndicate leaned forward. His sector had been forcibly realigned during the Zarnith expansion. Now his network suffered irregular supply feeds and disrupted navigation control. We lost access to half our own ports. Our AI flagged the compliance grid as Terran structured. We can't even fabricate core parts anymore without aligning to their formatting. Did they offer you a fix? Dahl asked. He nodded once. They did, an upload packet, fully autonomous, but tethered to a Terran compliance log. The table quieted. What did you choose? Someone asked. He answered without hesitation. I installed it. In Earth's orbital governance relay, located outside the quarantined navigation belt, a new series of requests poured in. Consultation inquiries from former Zarnith allies, previously allied trade guilds, and long-dormant blocs who had stood neutral. They weren't seeking permission. They were asking for stability. The Terran Accord responded with infrastructure packages. Nothing militarized, nothing centralizing. Just digital blueprints, modular, monitored, and locked to self-regulating thresholds. Each installation came with a clause. If the user attempted to circumvent the system, it would log and disable itself, permanently. Earth no longer debated terms, it published logic. On Pelin 4, a planetary trade summit convened among surviving colonial branches. The trade minister reviewed the digital architecture Earth had provided. It was elegantly efficient. Clean data chains, regulated bandwidth, loss prevention metrics, all autonomous. I expected surveillance, he admitted, but there are no monitors, just systems that correct themselves if manipulated. His second-in-command, a logistics expert, studied the specs with narrowed eyes. What happens if we reject it? Nothing, the minister said. But we'll remain non-operational until someone else around us installs it first. And once they do, we'll have to reformat to interface with them anyway. A choice that wasn't demanded, just mathematically inevitable. Back at Calceth, the Vuneth delegate cleared his throat. They haven't activated their fleets. Holography projection lit up. Terran warships in holding formation, dozens, perhaps hundreds, all powered, all idle. They're letting function act as doctrine, he continued, and so long as we operate within that doctrine, they do nothing. No one cheered, no applause followed. Because it wasn't peace. It was enforcement without presence. On Earth, deep beneath the Terran Accords Directorate building, Commander Halvin Dre reviewed an operational map now covered in blue interface fields. None of them bore Earth's seal. Every one was a client installation. He opened a new bulletin marked Interregional Trade Stabilization Clause Revision and signed it with his identification string. It contained a formal proposal for future compliance protocols and audit standards, not as conditions for trade, but as conditions for uninterrupted function. Dre then archived himself from the directive roster. The clause had passed. Its authorship was now irrelevant. The access corridor to the Echelon vault remained dim, lit only by operational markers along the ceiling. Each light pulsed once when passed, confirming the retinal ID and gait pattern of the man they had waited for. Commander Halvin Dre moved without hesitation. He had memorized the rhythm of these halls long before they were finished. Behind him, the lift sealed without command. The system understood what was about to occur, didn't need an audience. He approached the doctrine console, a spherical node embedded directly into the command wall. It was the last unsecured terminal in the vault, now running final audit alignment for the Echelon drift protocol. Its script scrolled cleanly in front of him, verifying the clause had been adopted across 94 interstellar blocks. None contested it. A few had even copied the architecture voluntarily. Expected pushback was 24 systems, he muttered, speaking aloud for the vault recorder, though there was no indication anyone was listening. Instead, we received requests for reintegration within 2 days of infrastructure failure. The screen adjusted as he keyed in a final command sequence. Transfer all doctrine to autonomous enforcement. A soft chime confirmed transition. Human oversight had concluded. He exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from calibration. Earth would continue. The doctrine didn't need hands anymore. Just memory. Dre approached the cryostasis chamber positioned at the rear of the command vault. It had been installed 20 years prior under directive shieldfall, not as punishment. Not as reward, just storage. For contingency assets deemed too dangerous to leave awake. The chamber's exterior chilled instantly as it unlocked, releasing a hiss of vapor across the floor. The cool hit his skin like a silent slap. The floor's vibrations subtly shifted as environmental pressure equalized for preservation mode. He sat down beside the chamber's intake bench, brushing off the frost already forming on the seat. From the side panel, he activated the monologue recorder. There was no audience. This was for audit protocols only. Should Earth ever require contextual review? Execution of drift protocol initiated on schedule, he began. Phase 1 triggered internal disruption. Phase 2 removed operational redundancy. Phase 3 forced cooperative recalibration. Strategic outcome achieved without vessel deployment, offensive ordnance, or kinetic contact. He paused, then added, Zarnith systems exceeded degradation estimates by 11%, not due to resistance, but fragility. Across the vault, the sealed doctrine drive began its descent into archive locking. Once it reached the bottom level, it would be submerged in electromagnetic gel, cut off from all data feed. Forever. It could not be accessed unless Earth's autonomous grid failed. Dre stood. He walked to the input slot beside the chamber and inserted the final artifact, a singular code chip bearing Earth's original trade warning, transmitted before the embargo. The system accepted it without ceremony. A line displayed above the chamber entrance. Final function, archived. Operator, exempted. He turned to face the intake panel. The sensor scanned his vitals, adjusted atmospheric mixture, and began countdown for cryo-seal. Before stepping inside, he added a final note to the audit feed. Breathless. They assumed they'd won because we spoke last. But our sentence wasn't language, it was structure. And now they operate within it. He entered the chamber. The seals locked into place. Temperature dropped in measured intervals. His breath slowed. His heartbeat stabilized. At 6% oxygen, the system tagged him, stored, non-essential status. The vault access locks initiated cascade seal, One by one, the interior lights shut off behind reinforced plates. The console lights dimmed. The walls retracted their data feeds into cold shielding. Above ground, the Directorate confirmed that all regions had accepted Terran protocol. There were no broadcasts, no declarations. Ships remained docked. Troops stood unused. No monuments were built. The galaxy reorganized not around fear, but architecture. Across former Zarnith sectors, aid packages arrived. Automated, encrypted, non-negotiable. They contained water regulation algorithms, food synthesis engines, and trade scaffolding. No Terran presence followed, just function. When factions tried to reverse engineer them, the systems deconstructed themselves. In schoolrooms across allied worlds, young students learned trade compliance using Earth's open framework. Terran formatting became default. Non-Terran systems required translation. On the fringe planet of Devkaris, a trader pulled up a new registry document and found it pre-sippled in Earth standard syntax. He blinked, then scrolled to the bottom. A note waited. Terran compliance, Cycle 1, format. He didn't understand the context. He didn't need to. At the center of Earth's black archive, deep beneath unpowered surface stations, a sensor confirmed 0 anomalies in active regions. No enemies. No exceptions. The system registered passive compliance at scale. No feedback required. And beneath that archive, frozen beneath reinforced alloy and regulation shielding, the architect of that compliance slept, not awaiting reactivation. Just stored. The story ended without celebration. Just a sealed vault and a system that no longer required permission. Earth rewrote the rules, but what kind of retaliation should we explore next? Just drop your ideas in the comments. Should humanity dismantle another empire, expose a hidden traitor, or confront something older than the galaxy itself? We're listening.